So we're just going to toss that. Eventually, when I place that blueprint, the box is going to disappear from my hand, so you have to build a new one. Then we can build this. And there we go, treasure chest. And as you notice, I don't know if you guys can see, but we now have 1 out of 3 treasure chests built. And that's basically the gist of the current demo that I have right now. And then once you do all that, you complete it. Ooh, we have an error here. Dun, dun, dun. Quest objective widget. What is this? Oh, somehow we triggered clean entryway. I'll have to look at that. I will. I do plan. So my current goal is to finish this, to get this on itch.io, to upload it to the game jam that ended back in November, because I promised myself that I would finish this demo for Emily's sake. By the way, M Audio did all the sounds and the music. She actually made the song for the game by herself from scratch, and then she also helped with all the audio. We're using Fmod in order to do the audio. Maybe we'll do a Kickstarter. Who knows? We'll see. But I promised myself and her that I would finish the demo. So everyone would get to play this level, get it up on itch.io, and then from there I'm going to work on a full product. And I have a much bigger scope for this game when I go to full. And I missed. I apologize. Device Serial, you followed. Thank you very much for your follow. I apologize. I missed your follow. But that's it. So we're working on that placement system. That's the last kind of piece of the puzzle to make the game fully functional. Then after that, we have to clean up some things, like some of the corners, some of the collision. We just have to move the collision in. And sometimes when you explode a skull, it like rolls into the corner. And because the geometry's there, it gets stuck behind it. And you can't see it anymore. So we have to clean up some of those little edge cases. And then polish some of the screens. So for example, if I go back into the game, none of these work. So we have to build these screens. And then we need an end condition. So when we go to him and we actually complete the quest, he does say thank you. Like he says thank you for doing this. And then basically that's the end of the tutorial or demo or whatever. And then we want to end the game, take the users back to the start. And then bug test. So we're getting there. We're getting there. I keep saying that. I keep saying, oh, this is the week. This is the week when we'll finish. And then we run into problems. All right. So we fixed the issue with these chests falling through the ground. We made them kinematic. They won't, once they get placed, they won't do it. I wanted to add rotation so you can spin them. But maybe I'll hold off on that for now. I need to fix it where when you place the object, it makes it remove from your hands. And the way I was going to do that was actually if we go to the player. I thought about this today because yesterday we got it working and then I was like, I'm done. Now I have 2 scripts here. One that handles when you pick up stuff. So anytime you pick up stuff, it gets handled by the object manipulator here. And that's what lets you hold it. Oh, that's the other thing too. We got to fix the treasure chest. Let you hold the object, and then the placement controller takes over when that object you happen to be holding is something that you can put down. Otherwise, you just throw it, right? So if you like, for example, you can actually pick up the treasure chests and toss them. Same thing with the skulls, the bones, all the items that are trash. You could just do that. So what we want to do is I want to merge these scripts together, because the problem is there's too much logic happening in each of them. And I think this would make more sense if these were together. So let me close this. Close all tabs. Let's open up the object manipulator, which is actually think what I'm going to want the class to be. And we're going to get rid of the placement controller. So we're going to have to move the functionality for the placement controller into the object manipulator. Now, the good news is it already has a reference to the camera. And this will be for release. So when we release, actually we'll call this hold and release. Preference. And then we need to move over this stuff. Let's move this over. And let's actually call this interaction. Let's move this stuff up here. Get rid of that. Okay. So we can start stripping this stuff out. Let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of this. So here we have a reference to the placeable, the blueprint handler. We're going to move this all over to here. We have the hold object, the release object. And then we have all these functions here. So let's just copy all this crap out. Move it over here. This is really bad, but I'm going to do it anyway. And then this has to extend from input receiver. Let's clean this up here. Controllers, inputs. Okay. So now we can make this just a plain old mono behavior. Close it out. We can delete it. Right. So this now we were setting the placement controller. So instead we're going to say set object manipulator. And this is going to get a object manipulator. Oh, can't spell. Object. Okay. And we're going to make this. And then this has to be object manipulator. So the placement service needs access to that because it has all the functions. Okay, let's see what else broke. So in here, thought I wrote this. Set object manipulator. Okay. we can now remove this. We have to go into our input controls, input receivers, and now we have to add the object manipulator to that. Okay, interaction layers, we have to change this to object. And we're going to ignore triggers. Everything else here is the same. Oh, the interaction range, I think we want 5. Okay. Okay. So let's order this a little bit. This function doesn't exist anymore. We can get rid of that. Hold object can stay there. Check placeable moves up here. Okay. And we don't need this. We're just going to say if that's null, turn, so we're not going to worry about that. Yeah, the current placeable is null. So actually, now that we can kind of refactor this a little bit, which for those of you that know me, you know I like to use the refactor code. But this is an example of where we're combining two classes together, and before they were communicating with each other through the service, but now we don't really need to do that. So what was happening was we were picking up an object. And what was happening was, so we're picking up prefab kit. right. And in construction kit, which is the class that's handling this, we were saying, oh, when you're holding me, activate placeable mode. We don't need to do that anymore. In fact, we may not even need the placeable service anymore. So let's see if we can eliminate this extra service that we created. Or maybe we do for some code, but so instead of doing that, we can, which means we can get rid of this. We can get rid of this. Hold object, we can say if held object that try to get I placeable, hold. So if it's a placeable, we're going to set the current placeable to the placeable, and we're going to spawn the placeholder object, which is what we were doing before when we went through the placeable service, right? We set the current placeable to this. We said, okay, if this was enabled, we spawned it. Otherwise, we removed it. So we can actually get rid of this. And then when we release the object, which means we threw it, we can say if held object dot try, actually, yeah, why not? Just do the same thing we did before. We remove the placeholder object and we set the current placeable to null. We can probably just, since we already know, we can say does not equal null because we already set it. We don't have to do the try get. So now we don't have to like do this weird loop through the placeable service. Now the placeable service though has a bunch of cool like snap to surface and all this kind of stuff, and we might want to keep these, but this might become a utility class instead of in a service. Like for example, if we don't need to, oh, that's right. Okay, so we need to move this over to object manipulator and say hold object. So if it's a placeable, we also need to turn off gameplay and turn on building. So we can now remove this. There's no references to it. And then in here, we're doing this. So that's held and then release. We have to switch it back. Okay. Then we can release this. Okay. So now, do we still need... We still may need this. Great question. Hello, first of all, null ref of anarchy or Arcani. Null reference of Arcani. Yes, services. So there are a lot of different ways you can set up. So one of the common problems you have in making a game like this is when you need components to talk to themselves, right? And A lot of times what happens is you have a game object. Let's say a simple one. You have a player, and the player runs around and they pick up coins, and then you have a UI, and the UI needs to update the coin counter, right? That's a simple example of when you have two different things that are across, different, like they're not in the same domain and they need to talk to each other. And there's a lot of different ways to do that, right? Typically in Unity, you could if your game is simple enough, you could literally just drag your player into the UI, or and then like have a score script on the player, and then when that score script updates it, or maybe have the score script have a reference to the UI and literally call it directly. But as your games get more complicated and you have things in different scenes, or your player can die and respawn and all this kind of stuff, and you don't have the ease of making like a direct reference, you have to come up with different ways to do the communication. Now, the simplest thing, and I think the most widely known way of handling that is exactly singletons. Everyone starts with singletons. Singletons are great. I like singletons. They work really well. I am not one of those people that are like, singletons are an anti-pattern, they're terrible, blah, 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 blah. No, they work fine. Right? Especially in like small games, they work fine. The problem I run into with singletons is that when your game gets larger and you want to do testing, like let's say you're working on a new feature and you want to test it in isolation. So you spin up a scene and you drag in your player, and then you drag in like the item you're testing. Let's say you're working on a crafting bench and you just want to test crafting. So you drag in your crafting bench, but your player has a reference to the singleton for inventory, and so does the crafting table. So now you have to create a singleton for the inventory. Oh, but the inventory one also depends on the singleton to interact with the UI. So now you have to drag in the singleton to the UI. And then, oh wait, that also requires the audio manager because all your UI has sound. So now you have to drag in the singleton to the audio manager. You get where I'm going with this? Like, it's like you have to then make sure for your one test scene, you're dragging in all these references now that really don't apply to the specific feature you're testing, right? That to me was like the one thing that I ran into with singletons that I have problems with. So an alternative to that is an event-based model, right? Event buses. And that separates those hard references. You have things that are firing events, you have things that are listening to events. And if you create a proper event bus that isn't necessarily needs to be in the scene, you can do those kind of things, right? Like an event manager, exactly, right? And if your event manager isn't a game object, isn't a mono behavior, you don't need to import that. It doesn't need to exist in your scene. Or if it does, it's okay. It's just you're doing the one thing, right? And there's nothing listening to those events. So you don't have to drag in an audio manager. You don't have to drag in an inventory, whatever. It's just you're firing off inventory events or sound events and no one's listening to it, which is fine. Makes it easier to test, right? Service locator pattern is actually another way to do this. And that's the typical pattern that I use in my game. And I can show it to you because, again, this is office hours. I love these kind of questions. So there's two ways to do services. You can do static services, or you can do the locator pattern where the services are not static except for the service one they are themselves. Yes, there are processing costs of delegates, but I mean, in the grand scheme, I mean, unless you're like really throwing everything you have through the event manager, you're probably fine. I wouldn't do everything, but you're probably fine. Now, so service locator, let's talk about service locator for a second. So I have a service locator pattern in my script here, in my game. Some of my services are static services. They don't go through the service locator pattern. I can call them directly and use static methods. My UI is based on that. So if I go to UI, services, I have an overlay service. Overlay is my generic term for anything that is UI relevant. So this is just a class. It's a static class. It lives in my project. I have a dictionary that's private. When a UI turns on, it registers itself with this. So when it's in the scene, so if I load it in one scene or then dynamically load another scene and it has UI in it, that UI is built to register with this service. And then I can call, hide, show, try, get, all this kind of stuff. It makes it super simple. And I can do things like what I did here. Where's a good one? Did I do it here? No, that's input. I'll talk about input in a second. Gameplay maybe. Hold on. Game manager. Here. So I can do things like overlay service.show, gameplay overlay, overlay.show, alerts overlay. I can just call it and the UI gets shown. Or I can hide the main menu, right? Super simple. But then sometimes I need to like initialize the service. Like it's not just about like writing things to it. It's almost like a blackboard. I write things to it, I read things from it, right? But sometimes I need to initialize it. It needs to start with stuff. So for example, my inventory system. I think my inventory system. No, not my inventory system. My quest system is a perfect example of where I need to initialize things. So with my quests, all my quests that I create are scriptable objects. So if I go to scriptable objects, quests, I have our quest here. This is the quest that you get when you talk to Grime. He gives you a quest. The quest has 2 objectives in it, and this is all defined in this quest, right? If I want to add another quest, I just create a new quest definition. My quest service, though, initializes that. So what I do is I'm using addressables here. I have an addressables bundle. For those of you that are not familiar with Unity and how addressables work, think of this like a collection of assets for my project that I've pre-compiled into a bundle, into a zip, if you will, and have tagged it with things so that I can retrieve it and load it into memory. Localization is a good way to do it, yes. So you want to pull in language files, right? You can load them dynamically. You don't have to load them all into memory. You can say, oh, the player has picked French, so I'm going to go to the package. I'm going to load all the French files, right? Here I have my quest. So anytime I add a quest to this file, it gets loaded into the bundle and it gets compiled. And then on initialize of my quest service, I basically use addressables to pull all my my quest scriptable objects into a array or into a dictionary by a certain key that I can then look up later. Then I can say, hey, start quest. And I can say start quest by this handle. And the handle will then go into the dictionary, get that quest object, and start it. Right? And the quest service does that. And what's nice is that in my service locator here, this thing why is this partial? My quest locator, my service locator, basically is a place where I register services. So now my quest service registers with this, and then I can call service locator.get or try get quest service, and then I can get that and pull that out. right? Frosty in Canada, thank you for following. Right? So I register the service. And what's really nice about this is that I'm using this hook in Unity called runtime initialization on load method. So before a scene loads in my game, I actually go through all my assemblies looking for anything that is of type iService. So my interface service. It has to be a class, it can't be an interface, or it can't be abstract. It has to be a concrete class that implements my iService interface. So now I don't even have to do anything. I just basically code services that implement iService. And this will automatically, when the game loads up, will suck them into the service locator and register them.